Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, things are not going as planned with respect to what's happening on the Trump camp. After all, what we're seeing with respect to that is a lot of anger, particularly coming from those who had been some of his loudest acolytes throughout the campaign process. Of course, I'm speaking of surrogates like former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin. She came out lambasting Trump in a recent piece that she penned for the Young Conservatives, saying that that carrier air conditioning deal that was worked out in the state of Indiana smacks of crony capitalism, the very sort of crony capitalism that she made a name for herself fighting throughout the time that she's been in the national stage of the American system of polity, going all the way back to 2008 when she was the vice presidential nominee for the failed candidacy of Republican Arizona Senator and, dare we say, liberal John McCain. Now, what she was upset with was the fact that with this carrier deal, they had received something that none of the other air conditioning manufacturing companies in the state of Indiana had received. And that was a $7 million tax break, give or take, and an attempt to prevent jobs from going to Mexico. They said that this was saving 1,000 jobs, and this was part of the populist fluff that was thrust upon the arena of American politics by Donald Trump and Vice President-elect Mike Pence, who is the current sitting governor of the state of Indiana, to try and make it appear as though Trump is already working to preserve American jobs. But here's the problem that we have with that. It is trampling upon the whole notion of a free market economy, something that has been a staple of the conservative message for generations. In fact, the whole notion of supply-side economics, what is commonly referred to as trickle-down economics, was championed under the lionized figure of Ronald Reagan. However, what we see coming to fruition with respect to all of this is that Trump is attempting to fundamentally, drastically, permanently, and dare I say irreparably transform the message and platform of the Republican Party away from that of a conservative and fiscally responsible party that champions the ideals set forth in the four corners of our shared United States Constitution to some frothing at the mouth workers' party. Now, we should all take a pause when we hear that he had wanted to say that he wished to transform the Republican Party away from being one based in the natural law tenets that by their very nature are immutable, or in other words, timeless, meaning they're just as applicable today as they were at the inception of this beloved representative republic of ours some 235 plus years ago, as God willing they will be some 235 plus years from today, to this Workers' Party. Now, a Workers' Party is something that populist fronts have used in history throughout the ages. I mean, this is something that I have oftentimes reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, The Wright Flyer. It ties directly into this notion that populism in and of itself is a failed political ideology. It has never truly worked, and every time that it has been attempted in these United States of America, it has led to a vast array or wide array of pain and suffering for the true ultimate ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty for this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people of these United States of America. Populism was, of course, first delved into in American history during the presidency of Andrew Jackson in the 1820s. It led to the first economic panic that this nation really felt with full effect. And that is exactly the type of danger that we are running into now. Palin is attempting to, I guess, regain some of her lost credibility after she was one of the first and loudest people to throw her support behind Donald Trump, saying that he would make America great again. Of course, as my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program, we take issue with that shallow, hollow, and ultimately meaningless platitude that was the campaign slogan of the Donald Trump candidacy. The reason that we do so is that that statement, "Make America Great Again," presupposes that America ever once ceased being great in the first place. That is something that simply isn't true. It is the furthest thing from the truth that one could possibly get. The reason that the United States of America has never once ceased being great is because, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, the Supremacy Clause, we know that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and it is still in effect. It may be battered and bruised thanks to the dark and twisted machinations of the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftist Barack Hussein Obama, who is outgoing at this point. But it is still there, it is still robust, and it still constitutes the longest contiguous or uninterrupted running constitutional document in the entire course of human events. Again, it tells us that our founding fathers possess near infinite wisdom and foresight when it comes to understanding innately and from within the heart that a true free nation and people must be one in which the people are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, in which their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights are protected by a great social contract. And of course, that great social contract is none other than our shared United States Constitution. So Palin said that it was wrong for the government to be getting involved in the private sector in this way. Recall that one of the things that was the main sticking points, for lack of a better term, with respect to the disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime is the fact that Obama would go forth and pick and choose winners and losers within the private sector. Think of things such as the bailouts, cash for clunkers. That's something that immediately comes to mind. Those things are inherently flawed. They are diametrically opposed to the clear and concise language contained within the 4 corners of our shared United States Constitution, and it shows us that every time that we distance and divorce ourselves from the language contained within the Constitution, that is when we see the nation head into hard times and into dire straits. This is just something that cannot be ignored, yet that is exactly what the Trump acolytes have been doing. Recall that I mentioned on one of my previous solo flight special editions of our state-of-the-art radio program that Stephen Moore, who was the father of supply-side economics, came forth and said that conservatives have to basically accept the harsh reality that this is no longer the party of Reagan. Now, Reagan was a constitutional compositionist during his first term, but even he fell victim and prey to the mentality of corruption that grips the hearts, souls, and minds of those who occupy those gilded and marble-encrusted offices in Capitol Hill. He essentially started to abandon the principles that are set forth in the supreme law of the land. And when he did so, that set us up for the economic calamities that would lead to the end of the George Herbert Walker Bush administration. Although George Herbert Walker Bush, being your typical detente-wing member of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, had made a plethora of promises that he didn't keep. Recall the whole notion of read my lips, no new taxes, I tell you what, Persian Gulf now. He squandered that opportunity. And because he also said that he was revoking his lifetime membership that was basically given to him by the National Rifle Association, or NRA, he called them jackbooted thugs. Now, that's interesting because one of the complaints that my first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, as well as my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and yours truly has with respect to the NRA, is that they are not taking a robust enough of a stance to defend our fundamental and inalienable God-given right to keep and bear firearms. Recall that one of the things that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind of that dastardly attack of Pearl Harbor, which Pearl Harbor Day is coming up in a short time, folks, he said that it would be suicide for the Empire of Japan to attempt to invade mainland America because there would be a rifle behind every blade of grass. That was part of the sleeping giant mentality that he was afraid of awakening within the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in these United States of America, we the people. But there's a reason that he understood intrinsically and inherently this characteristic of the American spirit, heritage, but above all, shared national identity. He had studied at Harvard University, and that exposed him to the true ultimate mentality of the United States of America. You see, the fundamental and inalienable rights that we possess, which were endowed to us by our Creator, who happens to be none other than the God of nature himself, has been a great shield for we the people. It has protected us not only from a rogue, tyrannical, and ultimately illegitimate government at home, but it has also sent a stark and harsh warning to any potential foe that might try and invade the United States of America. You see, the spirit of being able to stand up for and defend the natural law tenets that are embodied by that great social compact, which happens to be the greatest social contract ever devised by the hands of men, yet divinely inspired by providence above, is that we are willing to stand up to those forces. We were able to throw off the best organized and the strongest military force known to man, not once but twice. First, in the long drawn-out bloody affair known as the American War of Independence, and then again in the War of 1812. That characteristic of the United States and of her people is something that we dare not forget, because if we do forget it, then we begin to run afoul of our notions and identities and our philosophies. And think back to what the founding father Samuel Adams said with respect to what it would take to ensure that our representative republic would be a vital and robust representative republic. He said that it requires that the American people be a virtuous people, that they have good moral character and standing, and that they demand the same of their elected leaders. Unfortunately, that has been one of the major sticking points and pitfalls of this recent 2016 presidential election cycle. We have rejected the notion of being a virtuous republic as well as a virtuous people. And it is because we are so willing to go forth and forgive the foibles of Donald Trump, particularly those disillusioned conservatives that were enamored and intoxicated by the shrill, disharmonious tune of the Pied Piper of disillusioned conservatives, Donald J. Trump. They have gone out of their way to become mere apologists for Trump and his regime, or his building regime. The man hasn't even taken office yet, and he's already begun meddling in affairs that he should not be meddling in. Worse still, he is engaging in the worst characteristics of that type of crony capitalism that has led to the economic instability that has plagued us throughout the two disastrous terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. These are simple facts that we cannot ignore. And the fact that Sarah Palin is just now waking up to the realization that Donald J. Trump is no conservative is basically laughable to me. She's already torpedoed her own credibility. She essentially shot herself in the foot when she went forth and said that Donald Trump was very conservative. And then she besmirched, besmeared, and belittled Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who was the only true dyed-in-the-wool constitutional compositionist that was vying for the highest office in the land. She was one of the forces, and indeed one of the most shrill voices that led to the bizarre ascendancy of the mafioso quafioso. And therefore, when she is now realizing this, something that we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have been warning about for a year and 3 months now, I have no sympathy for her. Why did she refuse to listen to the voices of those whom had trusted her for such a long time? Recall that the title of her book was Going Rogue, that she understood that we had to stand up against the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, what is known in the common vernacular as the basic, establishment types, or the corrupt leadership of the Republican Party. But now she has gotten in bed with them. And this is not the first time that she's done this. But now, all of a sudden, it's as though she had the epiphany. I guess it's better late than never. Maybe she can rebuild her reputation in, 10 to 15 years. But I know that many of my close friends, and of course, yours truly, as well as our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, and our first officer, Jeremy Grapington, do not have it in our heart to forget what it is that she had done. It's part of the reason why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, had deemed the election cycle of 2016 as the election cycle of betrayal. And of course, there's an interesting story that's come forth that is being peddled. I believe it's by the Los Angeles Times, speaking about how Ted Cruz campaign director Jeff Rowe had gone forth and had shared some inside information with Donald Trump's little man there, Corey Lewandowski. Back after the victory in Iowa, Jeff Rowe had told Lewandowski that their internal polling was showing that Trump was not doing well because of the attacks that he had launched against his fellow Republican candidates throughout that first stage of the primary process. Of course, Trump's camp had not been conducting any internal polling on their own. So that is something that really concerns me. I don't believe that Ted Cruz was directly implicated or involved. I do think, however, that his campaign staff and personnel had let him down and had also, by extension, let down the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we, the people of these United States of America. I don't think that we should ignore these things. In fact, I think these things are only going to get worse as we get ever closer to that pivotal date in which the reins of political power in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours is peacefully transferred from outgoing Barack Hussein Obama to incoming Donald J. Trump. And it's going to get worse because these people are going to eventually just genuflect in such a way that they contort themselves into a proverbial pretzel trying to be apologists for Donald J. Trump. We all knew that Donald J. Trump would rule this way. We all knew that he would not live up to the wide plethora and array of promises that he made all throughout the campaign trail. Why? Because it is not in his nature. For the vast majority of the 70 years that he has spent on God's green earth, Donald J. Trump has espoused and championed the ideas of the frothing of the mouth Fabian socialist leftists who are hell-bent on the utter annihilation of the United States of America, both as a nation and as a people. These are just the harsh, stark facts of reality, and the truth always has a way of breaking through. It's as Aristotle, that great philosopher, said in his Art of Rhetoric, that people are more ready and willing as well as able to accept the truth than they are a lie. So the liars, or those who are pushing for an entire thing based on lies, have to basically break down into logical fallacies in order to push forth their agenda. Think back to the way that Donald J. Trump had attempted to come up with this narrative of Lion Ted Cruz. He basically tried to besmirch the man's honesty and his honor and integrity. On top of that, he attacked his wife and his father, basically relying upon an unsubstantiated and uncorroborated story put forth by his friend David Becker in the National Enquirer magazine. All of these things are still fresh. All of these wounds are still fresh. And Donald Trump is once again embracing the laughable ideology of the left. And again, it brings me back to Stephen Moore, who said that we have to accept this idea of even pushing for a $1 trillion over 10-year infrastructure rebuilding plan. That's not what this nation is about. This nation is about a robust and strong, free people. But you don't have freedom when the government overly and illicitly entangles itself in the affairs of the private sector. Again, that is diametrically opposed to the very sort of system that our founding fathers had envisioned when they conjured up the foundational image of these United States of America. And so as we look at this carrier deal, it once again smacks of that type of entanglement, that type of picking winners and losers, and of course, allowing it to be the taxpayers that ultimately suffer in the face of this sort of treachery, tyranny, and despotism. Again, if we are to ever restore this nation back onto the path to prosperity, we are going to have to put our foot down to this sort of, to steal a turn of phrase from the Trump camp, shenanigans that have been going on within government. It's something that I feel and fear is only going to get worse. And the fact that the Trump surrogates, such as Sarah Palin and, yes, little orphan Annie Yep Yep Toto Coulter, the floozy, are now waking up to the fact that he's a sellout, that is like crying over spilt milk. Except that they are the ones that intentionally pushed over the entire milk jug, and now they're crying about it. Now, when his true colors begin to bubble up to the surface, they have a problem with it. Again, this is all too little, too late. We knew, we have been warning here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, for 1 year and 3 months about how Donald J. Trump is simply not the man that he claims to be. And the fact that they refused to listen to these dire warnings that weren't just being projected or reiterated by us, but by all true dyed-in-the-wool constitutional compositionists, that is their fault. Now, of course, they are going to attempt to engage in obfuscation of the truth to try and say that they cannot be held to blame. Recall that we attacked conservative talk radio show host and constitutional attorney Mark Levin for being ridiculous when he tried to say that he could not be held accountable for the stupid things that Donald Trump and his surrogate said. Nothing could be further from the truth. When you vote for someone, that is the ultimate form of endorsement. Folks, there really is no way to candy coat nor to sugarcoat that fact. It is just one of those harsh, stark realities that we must all realize is coming to fruition. And of course, that's exactly what happens when you betray your principles, when you sell out to become shills for a movement, or when you think that victory somehow makes someone correct. That doesn't make someone correct. If we were to buy into that mindset and into that logical fallacy, then we could accept that Adolf Hitler must have been right, because didn't his Nazi party win? Wasn't he able to secure first the office of Chancellor, and then after the death of President von Hindenburg, merge that into the office of President to create the new office of Der Fuhrer? That's exactly what he did, but it certainly did not mean that he was right. He was a vile, wicked, evil little man. And again, that sort of thing is what the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media don't want you to know or realize. They don't want you to think of things in this way. They don't want you to recall that what makes the nation of the United States of America such a strong and robust nation in her relatively brief yet illustrious history is the fact that we have self-responsibility working in tandem with self-accountability, which thereby gives us self-determination. But to be a self-determinate people, we have to be willing to hold our elected officials' feet to the fire and to hold them accountable for their words, deeds, and actions. And that includes President-elect Donald J. Trump and Vice President-elect Mike Pence. You see, what makes me look at this carrier situation in which they claimed that they were saving 1,000 jobs, yet 700 jobs are still headed to Mexico, is that it happened in the state of Indiana. And Mike Pence is still the current sitting governor of the state of Indiana. That tells me that he is pulling these sorts of things in order to try and create a robust image heading into the transfer of power, heading into the opening days of the Donald Trump regime. And yes, folks, we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, shall refer to these years under Donald J. Trump as the Trump regime. He's going to run it that way because he believes in consolidated and centralized federal power above all else, despite the fact that the way that our shared United States Constitution is laid out, it clearly demonstrates and clearly states in no uncertain terms that the United States government is one that is strictly limited. That's part of the whole notion of the tenets of federalism. But Donald Trump doesn't understand that. Just as Donald Trump wants to go out and remove the citizenship of people who have exercised their First Amendment rights of petitioning the government for a redress of grievances, even though it is a vile act that they do in burning the colors of these United States of America, to claim that they should lose citizenship over that is absolutely contrary to the foundational image that our founding fathers dreamed of when they conceived this nation some 235 plus years ago. We cannot ignore these facts, yet that's what Mike Pence, Donald J. Trump, and many of the vast multitude of Trump followers and supporters would want us to do. They would want us to ignore these harsh, stark facts of reality because they want to buy into that false narrative. You see, their ego and their hopes and their dreams and their future aspirations have all been projected onto a man who assumed in their mind a messianic position. Again, this is why Jeremy and I have so oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that you cannot look for a messianic figure to come down and save this nation. That by the very inherent design of these United States of America, it is our duty, obligation, but above all responsibility to save the nation. You see, the power rests within your hands. That's why we are a constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic. It is because we, the people, delegated certain powers and authorities unto the government. And when the government stands in breach of that great social contract that is our shared United States Constitution, then it is the duty, obligation, and responsibility of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty to stand up to them and to correct them. And that is why we are able to petition the government for a redress of grievances. It goes to the very heart of what a free nation is all about. But again, that is what is being ignored by the Trump camp. And they are going to double down on these efforts to fundamentally, drastically, and dare I say, irreparably transform these United States of America from that beloved, constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic to a frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist dystopia that seems to come right out of the pages of an Orwellian nightmare. That is what we are facing. Those are the people that are trying to force us into a system that we were never intended to be. One of the indelible talking points, folks, that was reiterated all throughout the disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime was that the American people wanted freedom. They wanted to have free market solutions to the problems that face their nation. And the fact that we had gotten away from that to allow some sort of governmental cabal to take control of the reins of power and to act and operate in a way that was diametrically opposed to the clear and concise language contained within the 4 corners of our shared United States Constitution had led to the great plethora of problems that have been, coming to the forefront with respect to this nation's proper operations. And of course, that was in reference to many of the things that Barack Hussein Obama did. Recall the way that he attempted to push for green energy with tax subsidies for the failed solar panel manufacturers, that Solyndra company, as well as the bailouts that occurred with this notion of cash for clunkers. Yes, the bailouts had originally begun under the tutelage of outgoing president at that time, George W. Bush, and it was a disaster. It was not based on the natural law tenets that are found within the clear and concise language of our Constitution. And that's part of the problem that we had. It shows that when we do not live up to the supreme law of the land, and when we further distance and divorce ourselves from the fundamental tenets that are contained therein, that is when we begin to experience this wide array of problems that leads to disarray in these United States of America. And what's so amazing is that Mike Pence said on Thursday that essentially the free market has failed the people, and that the people have been suffering because the free market has gone forth and sent manufacturing overseas. What he didn't discuss, and what is really at the heart of that, is the overly harsh or overzealous draconian regulations and price fix schemes and tax schemes that have been put in place by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists who are seeking to essentially obliterate the private sector. And then with crony capitalism, they use that to line their pockets in order to basically carve out a special niche for themselves. That's one of the things that we have oftentimes lamented here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. It is the fact that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists just dabble in and wallow in hypocrisy. This whole holier than thou attitude of do as I say, not as I do. What's good for the goose is not necessarily good for the gander is just blatant hypocrisy. And it leads to the type of corruption that has been driving the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people, up the wall. But what Pence said there in response to this carrier deal, which smacks of the type of crony capitalism that most conservatives loathe and despise, what he himself, some 6 years ago, with the establishment of Obamacare, said it was a bad thing. He was now praising it. He was essentially saying that we shouldn't look for free market solutions. We should have the government interfere and meddle with it. And as we have mentioned before on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, it's this sort of mentality of this impermissible governmental entanglement with the private sector and the will of the people that has led to the type of rank and rampant corruption that just oozes from the pores of every snake that claims to be a politician in Capitol Hill. That's just something that cannot be ignored. But I want to go back and actually play a clip from Vice President-elect not Trump, but Pence, some 6 years ago when he was discussing this whole notion of free market solutions. And then we'll discuss how his tune has completely and fully changed over the years. So let me go ahead and cue this up now.
For more government, more taxes, more mandates. It's going to be Americans who are clamoring for freedom and for free market solutions.
Before I let you go, Congressman, I have to ask you, do you think that the president has managed to shift the vote situation in the House? All eyes are on the House right now to see whether Nancy Pelosi can get the number of Democrats she needs to vote for this thing so she can get it to pass the second time around. She says she's got them, and she's a very good vote counter.
She's a very good vote counter. But, you know, the person they always leave out of the discussion here in Washington, D.C., Megan, is the American people. The president's.
Yes, they leave out the American people. And what he was trying to do when he was going forth and attempting to proclaim that the free market has been settling itself out and it's the American people that lose, he's trying to say that, no, you as a true ultimate wielder of popular sovereignty of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours no longer have a say in how your business will be run. And in fact, it goes to one of those sticking points that we have with respect to President-elect Donald J. Trump, when instead of saying we're going to fix the draconian policies that have been implemented by the governmental establishment in Washington, D.C., so that these companies can come back. And of course, that means fixing the tax code, something that has been a glaring, blatant, open, and obvious problem for generation after successive generation. Unfortunately, what we see with respect to all of this is that Trump is not going to change any of that. Recall that he said that he's not going to touch entitlements, and he has put forth this social spending plan, this social works program that would rebuild, allegedly, the infrastructure of the United States over a period of 10 years and at the astronomical cost of $1 trillion. That is far greater than anything that President Obama ever imagined that he could get away with. And so it speaks directly to some of the multitude of problems that we're facing in this country. But over at Red State, Paterico put out a piece, said that incoming Trump-Pence administration, the free market has failed. He starts the piece by saying that the new official line of the incoming Trump-Pence administration, or what we will deem a regime here, is that the free market has failed and we need government-imposed solutions instead. And it starts going into this. On Thursday, as he toured the factory floor here to take credit for saving roughly half of the 2,000 jobs Indiana stood to lose, Mr. Trump sent a message to other businesses as well that he intended to follow through on his pledges to impose stiff tariffs on imports from companies that move production overseas and ship their products back to the United States. Quote, "This is the way it's going to be. Mr. Trump said in an interview with the New York Times, corporate America is going to have to understand that we have to take care of our workers also. So you see, he is engaging in identity politics, that he is working towards trying to basically shackle our companies instead of saying, look, the best way to bring people in is not with vinegar, but is with honey instead. And the honey is a free market, basically going back to the ideals that are found within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. But Trump, by his own fruition and admission, has claimed that he has never once read the Constitution from cover to cover in totality because he found no inherent nor any intrinsic value in that sacred document that defines and mandates the proper scope and application with respect to the utilization and exercising of governmental power. That is something that cannot be ignored. He then goes on to say, I don't want them moving out of the country without consequences, Mr. Trump said, even if that means angering the free market-oriented Republicans he beat in the primaries, but will have to work with on Capitol Hill. He goes on, and now we get to what Mr. Pence said, quote, the free market has been sorting it out and America has been losing. Mr. Pence added, as Mr. Trump interjected, every time. Every time? Seriously? That is what they're going to tell us? That is how they are going to try and convince us that their system works? Nothing could be further from the truth. And this is what Federico went on to say in his piece over there at Red State. What free market is that, Mr. Pence? The one that suffers under the crushing weight of federal regulation, with Obama setting records for the number of pages added to the Federal Register? The one that features some of the highest corporate tax rates in the world? That free market? Every time government interference hampers the economy, government blames the free market and hampers it further. Harry Brown used to say, the government is good at one thing. It knows how to break your legs and then hand you a crutch and say, see, if it weren't for the government, you wouldn't be able to walk. That's part of the problem. It shows us that there is this holier-than-thou attitude. There is this attitude of ignoring the true will of the ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. That is, we the people are being ignored. We the people are being lied to, and so many of those who have been the loudest acolytes of Donald J. Trump are basically going out on a limb to be nothing more than servile apologists for him, making excuse after successive excuse to try and save face with respect to what he's doing. I've even seen it in some of the comment sections in social media that they claim that the free market has failed and that the only way to roll back the tide to correct the problems that are facing this nation is not to go to the Constitution, but is to implement the same policies that got us into the problem in the first place. That is asinine. That goes against the grain. That is the sort of chicanery that should never be tolerated in an open and honest, but above all, free society like that of these United States of America. So we know that Trump has gone forth and Pence has gone forth and has essentially changed their message. That whole notion of the free market sorts itself out and America loses, that is totally the opposite of what he said in that clip that I played earlier. So it's no longer about the American people, except that they fluff it up in that populist sort of message to push for more centralized government control. Again, that goes against the letter and spirit of the law, but it doesn't matter to them. And so I've got yet another clip here where it's actually Pence. I'm hoping, I'm looking here. It's mainly Trump at the moment. It's Trump's speech on the carrier thing. But I want you to see what they're doing. I want you to hear what it is that they have been pushing for, and then to realize how this is out of line with what Pence used to say, because it goes directly to the heart of the matter. It goes directly to what's wrong with the country. And it really has no signs of improving at any time in the foreseeable future, because this is the man that we have elected as president of these United States of America.
So one of the reasons I wanted to do this particular conference is it's so great. So many people in that big, beautiful plant behind us, which will be even more beautiful in about 7 months from now. They're so happy. They're going to have a great Christmas. That's most important. But also, I just want to let all of the other companies know that we're going to do great things for business. There's no reason for them to leave anymore, because your taxes are going to be at the very, very low end, and your unnecessary regulations are going to be gone. We need regulations for safety and environment and things, but most of the regulations are nonsense. It's become a major industry, the writing of regulations. And
oh, so we need regulations, he says. But he then says we're going to get rid of most of them. You see, this is the sort of doublespeak. This is the sort of consistent inconsistency that we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have been warning you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, about for a year and 3 months now. It's the sort of thing that cannot be ignored, because it is the sort of thing that is directly at the heart of the problems that are facing us. Again, instead of turning to the free market, instead of turning to what has made this nation so robust and what has propelled this nation to such lofty heights in her relatively brief yet illustrious history, we ignore it and double down on the policies positions that are abject failures. There is no way around that, folks. There is no way to get around that fact or to candy coat or sugarcoat it. But that's what they want us to do. So they say, if, as Paterico did at Red State, if you don't keep in mind that it is the government that hampers business in the first place, and that it is the U.S. government regulations that makes our businesses fundamentally non-competitive to begin with, then actions like Trump's can seem beneficial, but they aren't. He then quotes what he wrote a day before that on Wednesday. The unintended consequences of government interference are not abstract. They are very real. Just ask carriers' competitors who didn't get a tax break because they haven't threatened to move anything to Mexico yet. But they will if they're smart. That's the other thing about intervention. One act of intervention encourages more. Welfare encourages people to seek benefits from government rather than by earning money through providing value to society. Corporate welfare does the same. What I have done is an exercise in looking at the seen and unseen, a concept that Paterico said that he has written about before. Government policy is often popular because there are obvious good effects that can be seen. But there are other effects that are unseen, and they exist too. And again, that's what is known as the doctrine of unintended consequences. For every action, there is an equal yet opposite reaction. And that's part of the problem. It's that governmental power should be used sparingly. And the reason that I can say that with the utmost amount of confidence that I do, sitting here, speaking into this microphone, conveying this message unto you, is because the history of our nation shows it. If governmental interventionism was something that worked or was something that was a good idea, that would have been the very way that our federal government would have been designed by the Constitution. Yet we can see that nothing could be further from the truth. The federal government must trace all of its authority back into a power that is specifically enumerated unto it by the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. Yet that is not what we see with respect to it, with what Trump is saying, and certainly not with respect to what Mike Pence said about this being the free market sorts things out and America loses. That's the exact and polar opposite of how our founding fathers intended for this nation to work. It's the exact and polar opposite of how good, decent, and free government operates. But they aren't interested in that. This is the type of chicanery that we knew that the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, were all about. It's all about forcing the government into the facets of our daily lives. They are just doing it at a different pace than the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists who have come out and admitted that that's who they are. So, in other words, they are engaging in acts of sheer intellectual disingenuousness. It's something that cannot be ignored, yet they want you to ignore it. They want you to see the scene, as Paterico put it at Red State, as opposed to considering the unseen. But you see, our founding fathers fully realized that the governmental encroachment or the governmental intervention into the sphere of the private sector always would have a detrimental impact. That is why they made sure that the reins of political power could not just be held by a singular entity or branch of government. It is why we have the separations of power. But that has been blurred, particularly under the disastrous 2 terms of this Barack Hussein Obama regime, which it appears that Trump and Pence are prepared to move upon full steam ahead, continuing these failed policies that further distance and divorce ourselves from the supreme law of the land, our shared United States Constitution. Again, this is something that we must take seriously, but so many have projected their own self-identity, self-value, and self-worth onto a messianic figure that they cannot divorce themselves from this, that they are seemingly incapable of opening their eyes to reality. They would rather continue to suffer from acute ostrich syndrome, where they shove their heads up their posteriors as opposed to in the sand. But we can't afford that. Not anymore. And I want to go back to Paterico's article because he said that Kevin D. Williamson attacks the deal from a very similar perspective. Back on Thursday at National Review, he said it is a company that has competitors who employ Americans and pay taxes, just as Carrier does. These firms and their employees are put at an economic disadvantage by the subsidies paid to Carrier thanks to Trump and Pence. That means that some of these companies probably will be less profitable, and that they will not hire people they otherwise would have hired. But you'll see no Trump press conference celebrating that. This is a case of Frederick Bazatat's problem of the seen versus the unseen. The benefits are easy to see. All those sympathetic workers in Indiana, the costs are borne by sympathetic workers, too, around the country, and by their families, and by their neighbors. But those are widely dispersed, so they are harder to see and do not hit with the same dramatic impact. In other words, folks, what we see is that Trump is acting in a form that can only be considered as political showmanship. He's basically doubling down on these efforts to bamboozle the American people, to act as though what he's doing is literally helping the nation, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. It's as the old adage goes, that when people go to Washington, D.C., they often feel that they need to do something. They need to appear to be active, when in fact the best thing that they could do is simply to do nothing. As Reagan said, the most frightening words in the English language is, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." But that's what Trump's whole campaign was built upon. It's what his narrative has been ever since he first officially threw his quaff into the ring back in July of 2015. It's the government that will work the solutions. It's the government that will provide solutions, when the government was the one that created these problems in the first place. Government overzealous regulation and draconian policies are what lead our companies to try and flee the overburdensome tax code. And we saw that Trump tried to say that, well, your taxes will be the lowest. How is that going to work? How is that going to work when he said that he's going to leave the entitlement spending in this nation, which is totally out of control, in place and untouched? You see, there is a virtual impossibility. There is something that cannot work, something that will require taxes to be raised. It's like George Herbert Walker Bush going in front of the cameras of the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and saying, "Read my lips, no new taxes now or ever." It's a lie. That's the problem, and yet the cheerleaders are still out there. They are still out there in caustic force, although we do see that some of them, like the people with Sarah Palin and in the form of little orphan Annie Yap Yap Toto Coulter the Floozy, saying that the big sellout has begun and that the voters have done all that they could and that they cannot be held accountable. That's the same sort of erroneous mentality that was parroted by Mark Levin, and what we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyers, said could not be true. That when you vote for someone, you have to take accountability for your words, deeds, and actions. I take full responsibility for my words, deeds, and actions. Yes, I admit that I was wrong when I thought that Hillary Clinton would probably win and that was part of the design. I think it still was part of the design, but I think that Hillary Clinton was just that bad of a candidate. I underestimated the intervention by the FBI to try and throw this for the populist cabal that has formed in the rank and file of the gutless opposition party, or GOP. There's no way around that. And yes, I admit that. But in a way, Hillary is still winning because Trump is pushing the same type of failed policies that we have seen trench itself in the American psyche throughout these disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. This is why we said that the only way to truly and properly restore this nation back onto the path of prosperity is to go back to basics. And basics in these United States of America has always been found within the confines of our shared United States Constitution. It is the key that will unlock the chains and shackles that have been impeding the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people of these United States of America. But that is not the position that Trump and Pence have been taking. This is crony capitalism. This is continuation of the status quo without reflecting upon the unintended detrimental consequences that will affect and afflict this nation. It's again like another old adage, that of the road to hell is paved with good intentions. No matter how noble the intentions of either Vice President-elect Mike Pence or President-elect Donald J. Trump really are, they are going to have a disparate impact on the United States economy. Now, the economy in and of itself is not that important. I know it seems so shocking and odd that we would say that when so many people have started voting by the economy alone. The economy is a symptom of the overarching problem. And so when you focus squarely on the economy, you begin to get tunnel vision and lose sight of the other aspects that are more important. Because the important aspects are that we have gotten away from the proper scope and application, as well as utilization and exercising of governmental power as outlined and mandated by the Constitution. So when you disregard the Constitution and focus only on the economy, which is a penultimate concern, then you're still going to have the disease. The disease is still there metastasizing, and all of your proffered and proposed solutions will ultimately end in a failure, in abject, utter, complete, and total failure. There is no way around that. It is the problem that is facing us in the United States of America. And folks, it really shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. And again, it goes back to why we said that you have to use the Constitution as the only litmus test in determining whether or not a candidate vying for the highest office in the land is truly qualified to assume the mantle of that office. That is not what I have seen with respect to Donald Trump. It's not what I'm seeing with respect to Mike Pence. I'm still wondering how it is that people said that Pence was a good choice for vice president when he has in fact been a staunch member of the détente wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP. In other words, that he advocates for expanding the scope and application of the federal government in direct contradiction to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. You see, when you just go off of a cult of personality, it leads to disaster each and every time. It's not the free market that has failed us, folks. It is government that has failed us. It is government attempting to trample upon the free market that harms us, instead of going back to strict adherence to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution at all levels of government. That is the only way that the chains and shackles that have been hindering and inhibiting the American people can be removed in any efficient fashion. Because everything else is nothing short of political kabuki theater. And that is why I said that what we saw there with respect to this carrier deal was nothing short of political showmanship. It's snake oil salesmen tap dancing as the nation burns around them, selling them kerosene, saying that that's the best way to snuff out the flames. Came to my mind with respect to Trump all of a sudden pushing to have this deal that appears to be worked out with the state government of the state of Indiana with Carrier Air Conditioning Manufacturing is the timing of it. Why now, of all times, would he push that? Well, it's to coincide with this political narrative that he's hoping to seize upon, something that he is hoping will help silence his critics. And that is, we see that the manufacturing jobs in the United States took yet another hit during the month of November. This comes out of cnsnews.com and is by Susan Jones. Manufacturing sector loses 4,000 jobs in November. The economy lost 4,000 manufacturing jobs between October and November. The Labor Department's Bureau of Labor Statistics reported on Friday. It's the fifth straight month of manufacturing job losses. And so Trump is trying to utilize this image that he is a great business tycoon and that he understands how to bring businesses and manufacturing jobs back into the United States, but not by, of course, turning to the free market. No, he has to lambast the free market and claim that it is failing and that we need to have a disastrous tariff to try and right the ship, so to speak. But it's the problem of the government, as I mentioned in the previous segments, intermeddling with the private sector that led to these sorts of disastrous consequences in the first place. We know that Trump did go out during the campaign trail, particularly during the primary process, and claim that the three most important aspects of the government, or the three responsibilities of government, is to provide security, but education and healthcare as well. Now, he had also tried to say that he was against Common Core standard education, that this was taking too much from the parents. But the person that he put into that position of the Secretary of the Department of Education is someone who has always pushed for essentially including Common Core standards, not just for public schools, but also for private schools and homeschooling curriculum. And that is just par for the course. And I think her name was Devoy or something like that. But anyway, back to the topic at hand. Susan Jones went on to say that the news comes one day after President-elect Donald Trump went to a Carrier air conditioner plant in Indianapolis to celebrate the company's announcement that it will keep 1,000 jobs, most of them in manufacturing, that it was planning to send to Mexico. Carrier's job-saving announcement happened after Trump called the head of the company on Thanksgiving on behalf of worried workers. In his remarks at the Carrier plant, Trump said, they really do need editors. Trump criticized the NAFTA trade deal that produced a one-lane highway into Mexico. Things are going to change, he promised. We have to bring our jobs back. Well, the problem is that the way that he is seeking to bring jobs back is not by implementing free market solutions, but is rather to once again increase the size and scope of the federal government exponentially. Again, none of that works in the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours, we the people of these United States of America. Again, it shows that failed policies are being basically tricked out to appear as though they are in the best interest of the American people, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. He wants to implement a trade tariff, in something that he has said would be as high as 45%. That is the same type of mentality that was embraced under the Herbert Hoover regime back in 1928 and 29 as the way to resolve the issue of the Great Depression, which had broken out. And I know that we have oftentimes reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that this regime is going to be this generation's Herbert Hoover, and that could be a direct and dire threat to true dyed-in-the-wool constitutional compositionism. The reason we say this is that the annals of history already has the example of Herbert Hoover. The Smoot-Hawley tariff was something that we discussed before, and that further wrecked the economy. Then a progressive FDR assumed the mantle of political power, but when he was elected into the White House and sought to create this New Deal, that included the Civil Corps that was running around building highways and dams, which oddly enough, that dam, the biggest one or the most famous, or dare I say infamous one, was named after his predecessor, Herbert Hoover, the Hoover Dam out there in Arizona and New Mexico area. That actually prolonged and worsened the impact of the Great Depression. It was the type of Keynesian economics that has failed each and every time that it has been utilized. And folks, what we heard from Pence and Trump as they were touring the Carrier air conditioning manufacturing plant was a commitment to once again embrace this whole notion of essentially having Keynesian economics at the political and economic epicenter of these United States of America. But as the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs said back in the late 50s and early 1960s in his magnus opus of Keynes at Harvard, Keynesian economics is actually a Fabian socialist leftist front designed to further entrench the government so that they are essentially dictating to us how we can live, what we can do, and whether or not we can live. If we continue to turn to the government as the end-all be-all solution for the problems that are facing this nation, it is only going to further entrench those problems. It is only going to make the problems we're facing that much worse in the long run. Yes, it may have short-term benefits, but we cannot be short-sighted, particularly when you consider the staggering amount of debt that has been amassed by the United States. And with him going forth and reestablishing diplomatic relations with the nation of Taiwan, it does threaten to start and even worsen this trade war. Look, I'm all for having diplomatic relations with Taiwan. I don't think we should have ever severed them in the first place. But at the same time, when so much of our manufacturing is already in China, and instead of actually focusing on bringing them back, not through a stick, but through a carrot of literally gutting the tax system, we are going to have this problem. We can't just continue the out-of-control spending. And our government, for generation after successive generation, has been spending like drunken sailors with no financial inhibitions, with no financial certainty or control. This sort of lack of restraint is exactly what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists want. And by putting a Democrat like Munchin in charge of the Treasury, it tells me that they are not going to change the policies, that they are not going to change the direction, that this swamp is not being drained, it is rather being dredged out so that it is even deeper than it had been before. And that is just something that cannot be accepted. We can't accept it. We can ill afford it right now. But he went on to say that he plans, he being Trump, to bring jobs back by reducing corporate taxes. Okay, that's a start, but really we ought to just eliminate them, and eliminating burdensome regulations, most of which are nonsense, he said. But again, the problem I have here is that with all things Trump, he goes out and he makes all of these grandiose promises. He goes out and he says all of these shallow, hollow, and ultimately meaningless platitudes, but never explains how it is going to be implemented, never explains how it is going to be utilized. And of course, he never speaks to the true ultimate supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what is known in the common vernacular as the Supremacy Clause, is none other than our shared United States Constitution. Folks, this sort of chicanery is not going to fix our problems. It is not going to restore our robust economy, because it is still focusing on the wrong things. It is still placing this nation onto an unsustainable trajectory that has been just rolling downhill for generation after successive generation. And unless and until we really begin to admit that, and we truly start to grapple with the real problems that are facing us on a daily basis, these problems are not only going to continue unfettered, they are going to be exacerbated and to accelerate exponentially. I wish that I had words of comfort and solace to convey to you as I sit here speaking into this microphone, but there are no such words that come up, because what we see is a repeat of the same failed things that have been harming us. But it goes back to why Trump and Pence decided to time this the way that they did. It's because in November, the Bureau of Labor Statistics counted 12,260,000 manufacturing employees, 301,000 fewer than the number in January 2009 when President Obama first took office. The number of manufacturing jobs dropped to 11,453,000 in February of 2010, a level not seen since 1941. And yet the response by Pence and Trump is to embrace ideas that have not been seen since 1928, ideas that rightfully had been thrown into the rubbish bin of history because they do not work. Free market And the free will of the individual is what propels this nation to the lofty heights she has managed to achieve in her relatively brief yet illustrious history. But that requires that we acknowledge that. It also requires that we be accountable for our own words, deeds, and actions, as well as holding those who wield the reins of political power, in other words, the political powers that be, the status quo that faces us, accountable for their own words, deeds, and actions. Unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing. This is more of kick the can. This is expanding the government. This is further entrenching government at the great detriment of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people of these United States of America. There really is no way around that. It is what we are facing. And it's interesting to note that since that February 2010 low, 807,000 manufacturing jobs have come back as the recession ended, according to the news. But during the 2012 presidential campaign, Obama set a goal of creating 1 million new manufacturing jobs in a second term. The Alliance for American Manufacturing, a union, one of the problems is keeping track. And it says the president still has 700,000 jobs to bring back to achieve that goal. He's not going to, not with this little bit of time. And again, it's because of the draconian regulations. It's because we have this out of control entitlement mentality and spending, which has been hampering growth in the United States of America. And unless and until we really, truly, honestly address that and explain how it is addressed and how it is in line with the clear and concise language of the Constitution, this problem is only going to be exacerbated. So we, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, need to come to terms with this. We need to demand that this actually be spelled out and end the secretive populist drivel that has become the new stage setting for this awful display of political kabuki theater. But I'm not going to hold my breath on that one, folks. I am not, because it goes to the heart of the issue that is holding us back. It goes to the heart of why we are facing what we have. And the only way to overcome this is to go back to basics, to go back to the Constitution. But we haven't seen that occurring. We haven't seen the way things are going to be laid out in a logical fashion that follows the Constitution and restores us to the path of prosperity. And again, that is one of the major pitfalls and shortcomings that we are facing. So we see that real unemployment is at 9.3%. And of course, these policies that have been proposed by Trump and Pence are not going to be real, practicable world solutions that can fix the problems. And it is, again, just going to the heart of the matter of the problems we face. So how? How do we restore prosperity? How do we alleviate the problems that face us? By going back to the Constitution. It is literally that simple, folks. It is literally that cut and dry. But they don't want to. They don't want to. They want to continue to go along the lines of what we have seen. Now, here's something that's interesting. We see that gun sales once again deny critics. This comes from the Daily Caller and their ammo and gear reviews. And it's from NRA ILA, who is a contributor. And it says, gun sales deny critics and sets record on Black Friday. With the election of Donald Trump in early November, many mainstream news sources predicted a substantial downturn in gun sales. Some even claimed that Trump's victory would cause slower sales on Black Friday, which is often one of the strongest days for firearms sales. As has become the norm for mainstream media predictions, this forecast of Black Friday gun sales turned out to be completely false. And of course it is. Why? Because Trump himself went forth in 2013 and helped fund the failed Dianne Frankenstein, assault weapons ban. He said that he supports the no fly, no buy, and if you dare mention due process, we cry bill, which would strip and deprive people of their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, not only to keep and bear firearms, but to due process. In other words, having a notice and a hearing before they are stripped of these sacred rights. Why is it that we encounter this problem repeatedly? It's because the mentality of Washington, D.C. has become one which is diametrically opposed to the true hopes, dreams, and future aspirations of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people of the United States. That is why we see this continue. But as the article continues, rather than suffering from slow sales projected by experts, November 25th, 2016 set the single-day record for the number of background checks conducted by the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, or NICS. Because a NICS check is generally required before a firearms dealer can sell a firearm, NICS numbers are used to represent firearm sales since more accurate data is unavailable. The FBI processed 185,713 NICS transactions on Black Friday 2016. This surpassed the prior one-day record set on Black Friday 2015 by several hundred checks and was the third busiest day for NICS by over 8,000 checks. That's amazing. It fully explains the problems that we're facing. It fully explains that the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty are feeling as though their gun rights are in jeopardy. They sense the discontentment. They sense the growing instability. And certainly when you have organizations like the Black Lives Matter organization that is nothing short of domestic terrorists targeting our nation's law enforcement officers and agents, it goes to reason that people would want to defend themselves. We are rejecting this notion of trying to ban the right of the people to keep and bear firearms. And though it's interesting, as the article goes on, it says, even though NICS checks do not have a one-to-one correlation with gun sales, it's likely that in more recent years, NICS numbers further undercount the number of new gun sales than the system did in the past. Since NICS came online in 1998, an increasing number of states have a permit or license that qualifies as an alternative to NICS. Now, what they're trying to say here is that maybe this is a bad thing, except that you have to meet an even more robust background check and security check before you can obtain your carry conceal license. Since holders of these licenses and permits do not undergo an NICS check when acquiring a firearm, their firearm purchases are not counted in the NICS numbers. But they say further, as with many big questions this fall, the mainstream media completely failed in their prediction that the election of Donald Trump would mean a clear downturn in firearm interest and sales. Once again, we can thank them for being consistently wrong on issues that matter so very much. Well, yes, that's true. They have been inconsistent, and it's because they are unwilling to divorce themselves from this diatribe that they've had for years. And it really is pathetic. that the media continues to push a frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist and this narrative and agenda because they don't want the people to be powered and empowered. Why? Because deep down, they loathe and despise the ability for us to be self-accountable, self-responsible, and have those things working in tandem in order to make us self-determinate. Because again, that goes to the heart of what makes us a robust nation. That is what makes us free. And unfortunately, they have been agent provocateurs of trying to take that away from us. But folks, they cannot. So what we see is it's too little too late for so many of those who have been pushing for Trump to try and say that this is a fluke and that they cannot be held accountable for it. That the carrier deal is nothing short of the type of crony capitalism that has ailed and afflicted this nation for far too long now. And we see that gun sales are still going up because people do not trust Donald Trump. As my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, the reason people don't trust him is that Donald Trump has been consistently inconsistent, at least since he has entered into the bid for the White House and has become the president-elect of the United States. And that is because he really is a frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist. He has espoused that position for the vast majority of the 70 years that he has spent on God's green earth. But we do not have to accept it. We do not have to bow down and allow these charlatans to have their way with us. We can once again embrace our rightful role as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours and put our foot down and say no, because that is our duty and obligation as a people and as a nation. And we cannot forget it. That is why we say that it is absolutely imperative for you to foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution and thereby your fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, because it allows you to put your foot down and to say no to the government and to those charlatans that would strip and deprive you of your God-given rights. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Yes, folks, that alcohol is good alcohol. It has not been threatened to be blocked by a tariff, and therefore you should enjoy copious amounts of it. As always, folks, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for tuning in to our state-of-the-art radio program. Should you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or even topic suggestions for us, please feel free to leave them either here at our YouTube page or our Google Plus page, or indeed even our Facebook page. And on top of that, I invite you to follow us at Twitter with the Twitter handle at Radio Aviation EX. One more time, folks, that's at Radio Aviation EX. And there you will find the departure board that lists both my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton's personal Twitter account, as well as my own. You will also find the Blogspot account, where I am slowly catching up to put up alternative links to this video, as well as the audio-only version of our state-of-the-art radio program, so that you can listen to it however you want, or to watch it however you want and at your leisure. But you will also find, during this holiday season in particular, the Cafe Press account, where we have all sorts of stocking stuffing goodies that you can use to show your family that they are, and your friends and your loved ones, that they are deeply appreciated. This includes drinking glasses, coffee mugs, thermoses, you know, water bottles for exercising, and shot glasses, as well as shirts, hats, ties, bumper stickers, buttons, jewelry, laptop sleeves and protectors, tote bags, phone sleeves and protectors. You name it, we have it, either with our original Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer logo, or our First Class Passenger logo, or the two new Uplifting America logos, like what you see at the opening of our programs now. Folks, we hope that you are enjoying this holiday season right now, and we want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas. That is fast approaching, and that is why we suggest the Cafe Press account for some of those last-minute Christmas shopping ideas. Thank you again for choosing the Wright Flyer. We shall see you again next time. Please do take care.